There is a specific kind of personality profile we are looking at today. It is not the loud, obvious kind of destructive behavior. It is quiet, the kind of pattern that leaves the people around it feeling entirely mentally foggy, drained, and usually blaming themselves. We are looking at a combination of traits: manipulation, deceit, exploitation, emotional abuse, and being deeply image-driven.
The fog is actually the defining feature. When you look at the research, and there is a lot of it on this specific presentation of traits, often overlapping with what psychologists call vulnerable narcissism or covert dark triad traits, the damage is almost entirely relational. It is not physical aggression, it is psychological. And the reason the victim feels foggy is because the entire architecture of this personality is built on concealment. Actually, no, concealment is too passive a word. It is active disorientation. You are dealing with someone who uses confusion as a primary survival mechanism. They do not just hide the truth, they actively scramble your ability to perceive it. It is a very specific type of psychological warfare conducted in whispers.
That is a structural problem for the victim, because if the abuse is the confusion itself, you can't even point to the injury. You just know you're bleeding.
Exactly. Well, wait, let me be precise. You know you are losing something, but because of the way this person operates, they have already convinced you that the loss is your own fault. Let us take the manipulative aspect first. A woman operating with these traits rarely makes a direct demand. Direct demands carry accountability. If I say, "Give me this," and you say no, I have to deal with the rejection, and I have to own my desire. This profile avoids that entirely. Instead, she influences, she guilt trips, she creates a situation where you feel compelled to offer the very thing she wants so she never has to ask. It is weaponized dependency. She plays on sympathy, maybe withholds affection or peace, and suddenly you're scrambling to fix a mood that she intentionally manufactured.
She creates the weather and then gets mad at you for getting wet.
That is an incredible way to put it. She creates the weather, watches you shiver, and then asks why you did not bring a coat, while simultaneously hiding your coat. And when we look at the psychological literature, particularly regarding female expressions of these traits, we see a heavy reliance on relational aggression rather than overt dominance. This means the aggression happens through social channels. It is the silent treatment. It is pitting people against each other. It is saying one thing but heavily implying another so that when you react to the implication, she can retreat to the safety of her literal words. "I never said that," she will say, and technically maybe she didn't, but she meant it. The pattern is always pressure, followed by confusion, followed by an emotional reaction from you, which then allows her to blame you for reacting.
Let's pull on the deceit piece, because deceit here feels different than just telling a lie to avoid trouble. It sounds like an entire operating system.
It is a lifestyle. Simple lying is usually situational. Someone makes a mistake, they panic, they lie to cover it up. Deceit in this context is environmental. The stories never stay consistent because the truth is completely secondary to the utility of the narrative in that specific moment. She leaves out key facts on purpose. She tells half-truths. And the really crazy-making part is how she acts offended when questioned. That righteous indignation is a shield. If you ask a clarifying question, you are suddenly interrogating her. You are being controlling. You are not trusting her. The issue shifts instantly from her inconsistent story to your moral failing for doubting her. She survives to a mixture of concealment, confusion, and absolute, flat-out denial of things she clearly said or did.
Which ties directly into gaslighting. The literature is pretty clear on how destructive that is to a person's baseline cognitive function.
It destroys the baseline entirely. Research on psychological abuse shows that sustained emotional manipulation, gaslighting, is linked to severe anxiety, depression, lowered self-esteem, and trauma symptoms, even when there is absolutely no physical violence present. Gaslighting is essentially making a person question their competence and their basic perceptual experiences. It is not just, I disagree with your memory. It is, your memory is fundamentally broken and you are crazy for trusting it. Over time, the victim actually starts outsourcing their reality to the person who is destabilizing them. You stop trusting your own brain. And that is exactly where this type of person wants you. Because a person who cannot trust their own mind is infinitely controllable.
I want to stop there for a second, because the word controllable implies a level of conscious masterminding that I am not sure always exists here. Are we assuming she wakes up and thinks, how do I dismantle my partner's sanity today?
I see why you would push back on that. It does sound like a comic book villain when you frame it as conscious plotting. And you are right, it is rarely a calculated Machiavellian whiteboard session in her mind. But the lack of conscious, mustache-twirling intent does not change the function of the behavior. The control is often an anxiety response. It is a survival mechanism rooted in deep insecurity or vulnerable narcissism. She feels internally fragmented, so she has to micromanage the external environment and the people in it to keep herself from feeling exposed or out of control. When she gaslights, she might actually be convincing herself of the lie in real time because facing the truth of her own behavior would cause a narcissistic collapse. But, and this is the crucial part, the motive being subconscious does not mitigate the damage. The outcome is the exact same. She wants control without accountability. Whether it's driven by anxiety or calculation, the casualty is still the other person's reality.
Okay, that holds. The drive is self-protection, but the methodology is destruction. Let's look at the double-minded aspect, the public innocence versus the private cruelty.
This is the part that isolates the victim more than anything else. A double-minded woman presents as entirely divided. She will say she loves you, but every action she takes undermines your well-being. She demands absolute loyalty while being covertly disloyal herself. But the most dangerous manifestation of this is the split between the public persona and the private reality. In public, she is nurturing, she is the victim, she is spiritual, she is the pillar of the community. In private, behind closed doors, she is cold, critical, and cruel. She changes her values depending on who she is interacting with. So when the partner or the child finally tries to speak up and say, I am being abused, the community looks at them like they are insane because the community only sees the curated image. It creates this profound mental exhaustion for the victim because nothing aligns. The outside world is validating a version of this person that simply does not exist in the home.
That brings in the image-driven trait. The curation is the point. The appearance of morality replaces actual morality.
Precisely. She is more committed to the appearance of truth than the truth itself. She curates innocence. She wants to be seen as the good mother, the supportive partner, or very often the tragic victim, far more than she actually wants to do the work of being those things. She protects her reputation at all literal costs. If she does something objectively terrible, her primary emotional reaction is not guilt or remorse for the harm she caused. Her primary emotion is absolute panic about being exposed. The anger she directs at you isn't because she feels bad, is because you caught her, and you are now a threat to the image. She will use social media, religion, her family standing, anything as a shield. She values status symbols and optics over substance. Exposure is her greatest fear, far outweighing any fear of doing wrong.
And when she feels that threat of exposure, she pivots to exploitation. The people around her aren't people, they are resources.
Resources, utility, shields, or weapons. That is the exploitative mindset. She tends to see people entirely in terms of what they can do for her. Money, shelter, status, connections, or just emotional supply. She drains without reciprocating. You will notice she becomes incredibly warm and affectionate, but only when she needs something. And it is incredibly insidious because she will weaponize your best traits against you. She will use your loyalty, your empathy, maybe even your past trauma or a disability to keep you hooked. She expects massive sacrifices from you, but gives almost nothing back. Or she gives just enough intermittent reinforcement,
a breadcrumb of affection here and there to keep you on the hook. It is a parasitic relational style. She uses other people's labor, emotional and physical, while pretending the relationship is perfectly mutual.
This leads into the sexual recklessness mentioned in the source material. It explicitly says this isn't about simply having a sex life, but about irresponsibility and using intimacy strategically.
Right, and we have to be very careful here because society often conflates sexual agency with sexual recklessness, and they are not the same thing. What this refers to is destructive, deceptive behavior. It is repeatedly cheating, hiding partners, or maintaining overlaps while demanding monogamy from the other person. It is lying about history or current behavior in a way that actually exposes others to physical or emotional danger. But deeper than that, it is about mixing sex with manipulation, using intimacy to gain control, to extract money, to get revenge, or simply to secure validation when her ego is low. She treats deep intimacy casually, but demands absolute, unwavering loyalty from her partners. She uses seduction strategically to blind people to the red flags. The core issue isn't desire. It is a complete lack of boundaries and a profound disregard for the harm she causes others.
Wait, does that actually hold? Because if we look at cultural conditioning, women are often taught that their primary value is sexual or aesthetic. So using seduction strategically, couldn't that be argued as just playing the hand she was dealt by a patriarchal system? Is it inherently pathological or is it adaptive?
That is a really valid tension. It is true that society heavily conditions women to view their sexuality and image as currency. So yes, on one level, leveraging that is an adaptive survival strategy in a flawed system. But the line between adaptive survival and pathological exploitation gets crossed when it involves active deception and non-consensual risk to others. If someone is using their aesthetic privilege to get a free drink, that is playing the game. If someone is maintaining multiple hidden relationships, exposing a primary partner to STIs, lying about paternity, or using sex to deliberately triangulate and destroy people's lives, that is not just playing a bad hand, that is relational violence. The distinction lies in the disregard for harm. The pathology isn't the seduction. The pathology is the willing destruction of another human being's psychological and physical safety to serve her own ends.
The disregard for harm is the through line for all of this. The emotional abuse relies on that exact disregard.
It is the bedrock of the emotional abuse. Emotional abuse from this type of person is rarely screaming and throwing plates. It is a slow, methodical wearing down. She humiliates you, but wraps it in a joke. She belittles your feelings, telling you you are too sensitive. She mocks your pain. She constantly criticizes you, but frames it as just trying to help. She learns your deepest vulnerabilities, the things you told her in strict confidence, and she weaponizes them during arguments to paralyze you. It is a cycle of giving affection and then coldly withdrawing it to keep you off balance. She provokes you relentlessly behind closed doors until you finally snap and raise your voice. And then she instantly pulls out her phone, starts recording, and says, "Look how abusive and crazy you are." She creates pervasive fear in the home. And the mechanism, as research points out, relies heavily on destabilization, shame, and coercive control.
Let's put all these pieces together. When you combine the manipulation, the deceit, the double-mindedness, the image management, what is the actual experience of the person on the receiving end?
The experience is one of profound mental and physical exhaustion. People around this type of woman feel completely drained. They feel a heavy, lingering guilt for things they didn't even do, because she has projected all her own toxic shame onto them. They walk around in a permanent state of mental fog, unable to get a straight answer about even the simplest things. They feel used. And perhaps the most tragic part is that they become afraid to speak, because they know that any attempt to hold her accountable, any attempt to simply say, "Hey, this hurt me," will be instantly flipped. The confrontation will be twisted so violently that the victim ends up apologizing just to stop the verbal barrage. The damage is intensely real, but it is incredibly hard to prove to anyone on the outside.
Because they have insulated themselves with that curated public image.
Exactly.
They have built an impenetrable fortress of public innocence. So if a partner tries to explain what is happening, they sound like the crazy one. They sound bitter or delusional. And you have to remember, this entire dynamic usually starts with an incredibly strong first impression. Fast trust building, love bombing. She mirrors your deepest desires, makes you feel seen like never before, and hooks you in quickly. By the time the mask slips and the inconsistent stories and emotional chaos begin, you are already deeply invested. You keep waiting for that amazing woman from the first 3 months to come back, not realizing that she never existed. She was just a reflection of what you wanted, used to secure your attachment.
I don't know, that feels too clean to me. The idea that the first 3 months were entirely a fabricated illusion. Can someone really maintain a 24/7 theatrical performance for months without any genuine connection slipping through?
That is a really good catch. You are right. 100% fabricated illusion is probably too simplistic. It is more complex than a sociopath just reading a script. In many cases, especially with vulnerable narcissism, she probably genuinely believes she is falling in love during that idealization phase. She is desperate for a savior, someone to fill the empty void inside her. So the passion and the intensity are real to her in that moment. The problem is that it is not based on who you actually are. It is based on her fantasy of what you can do for her. As soon as you show a flaw, or set a boundary, or fail to perfectly regulate her emotions, the fantasy breaks. And because she has no object constancy, you go from being the perfect savior to the ultimate enemy. So the early days weren't necessarily a calculated lie, but they were a projection, which means the connection wasn't grounded in reality.
That makes the devastation make sense. The foundation was made of smoke. So what are the clearest warning signs for someone trying to navigate this?
The Carson the source material provides here is crucial. One behavior alone doesn't prove anything. Everyone has bad days. Everyone lies occasionally or acts selfishly. What you are looking for is a repeated pattern over time, the consistency of the deception, the total disregard for harm, the absolute refusal of accountability. If you want the shortest checklist of red flags, she lies easily and frequently. She twists reality when confronted. She uses your vulnerability as leverage. She demands control without taking on any responsibility. She has two distinct personalities, one for the public, one for you. She uses people, and then, when they have nothing left to give, she discards them and plays the victim to the next person. She keeps you confused specifically to protect herself.
It is a system of survival built on consuming other people.
That is the bottom line. A woman operating with these traits does not merely have flaws or quirks. She is operating from a deeply ingrained pattern of control, appetite, self-protection, and image management, and she is doing it entirely at the expense of truth and other people's psychological well-being. That is when it crosses the line from a difficult personality into something genuinely dangerous. The psychological toll on the partners and the children who have to navigate this fog every day is immense. It alters their brain chemistry. It strips them of their autonomy.
We've mapped out a really heavy terrain today. This architecture of control, the way deceit and image management create a trap that's almost invisible from the outside. It leaves a lot to process, especially the realization that the confusion isn't a byproduct of the relationship, it's the actual weapon being used.
Yeah, and that is a strange thing to sit with. The idea that someone's primary mechanism for feeling safe is making sure you feel crazy. But identifying the pattern, naming the gaslighting, the relational aggression, the weaponized vulnerability, is the only way to clear the fog. The original material we broke down today lays this out so clearly because naming it is the first step to dismantling it.
If this breakdown helped you see a situation more clearly, pass it along to someone who might be sitting in the fog right now. Send the link to a friend who needs to hear it.